"No," the woman in front of him said, not even bothering to lower her voice. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble like punctuation marks on his humiliation. Nathan forced his hand back to his side. He smiled, the kind of smile that costs a person everything to hold in place. Across the room, another woman saw him approaching and ducked behind a server carrying champagne. A third pretended to check her phone. A fourth actually hid behind a towering ice sculpture shaped like a swan, peeking out only when she was sure he'd moved on. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Quiet at first, then louder. Someone in the back didn't even try to hide it. A sharp, cackling laugh that carried across the entire ballroom. Nathan stood in the middle of the dance floor, alone, in a $3,000 tuxedo, heir to a real estate empire worth billions, and not a single woman in the room would dance with him. He laughed too, because what else was there to do? Then the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. A young woman walked in, still wearing her work gloves, dirt staining the knees of her trousers, a bundle of fresh white roses cradled in her arms. She wasn't supposed to be there. Everyone could see that. But she walked forward anyway, past the stunned waitstaff, past the security guard who opened his mouth to stop her, and then, for reasons he couldn't explain later, closed it again. She set the roses down gently on the nearest table, looked at Nathan, smiled. "Would you mind dancing with someone who doesn't care what people think?" The laughter in the room died instantly. No one there understood it yet. Not Nathan, not the guests whispering behind their champagne flutes, not even Sarah Okoye herself. But the poorest person in that ballroom was about to teach the richest people in the country the most expensive lesson of their lives. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 weeks earlier, nobody in the building knew Sarah's name. She was the woman who tended the flower beds outside King Global's headquarters, the one who hummed old Afrobeat songs while she worked, the one who talked to roses like they could hear her. "You're going to bloom beautifully today," she told a stubborn cluster of white roses one morning, crouched in the dirt with her gloves caked in soil. "I can feel it. You just need a little encouragement, that's all. Flowers bloom faster when they hear compliments, you know." A junior accountant walking past raised an eyebrow. "You talk to flowers?" "Of course," Sarah said without looking up. "Somebody has to be kind to them. Nobody else around here has the time." She came to Canada 4 years ago with 2 suitcases and a horticulture degree that nobody wanted to recognize. She applied to nurseries, to landscaping firms, to botanical gardens. Nothing. Eventually, she took the only job that would have her, gardener for a corporation that didn't know she existed beyond the line item in their facilities budget. She didn't complain. Complaining, she liked to say, was a waste of good breath. "If it rains and ruins my whole afternoon," she told her neighbor once, "I just tell myself the flowers needed a shower. If I miss my bus, I say God wanted me to enjoy the fresh air a little longer." She shrugged. Life is funnier when you let it be funny. Inside the building, 3 floors up, Nathan King sat in a glass office overlooking the city, staring at a spreadsheet he wasn't really reading. "You're doing it again," his assistant said from the doorway. "Doing what?" "Avoiding the gala planning emails. There are 43 unread messages from the events team." Nathan rubbed his temples. "Can we just skip this one?" "Your father is the host, Nathan. You can't skip your own family's charity gala." He knew that. He'd known it for weeks, the way a man knows a storm is coming and still can't stop himself from dreading the first drop of rain. 3 years ago, a video of him dancing at a corporate event had gone viral. Arms flailing, feet tangled, his date visibly trying to put as much distance between them as physically possible while still technically holding his hand. 11 million views, thousands of comments. A nickname that followed him to every gala since. King of 2 left feet. Women didn't see Nathan King the man anymore. They saw a punchline with a trust fund. "Maybe this year will be different," his assistant offered. Nathan almost laughed. It's never different. He was right to worry. The night of the gala, the ballroom filled with Canada's wealthiest faces. Tech founders, real estate moguls, minor celebrities trailing photographers, his father's business partners draped in jewelry that cost more than most people's homes. Crystal chandeliers threw soft gold light across white tablecloths. An orchestra tuned quietly in the corner. Nathan stood near the entrance in his tuxedo, watching the room fill, his stomach already tightening. "You look like a man walking to his own execution," said Michael Reed, appearing at his elbow with a glass of scotch. Michael was the chairman of the board, sharp-suited, sharper-tongued, with the particular cruelty of a man who'd convinced himself his money made him correct about everything. "Feels about right," Nathan muttered. "Just ask Olivia Bennett. She's been eyeing your family's name all season." Olivia Bennett was already across the room, a luxury influencer with 2 million followers and a smile calibrated for cameras. Nathan approached her, swallowed his nerves, and extended his hand. "Would you like to dance?" Olivia's smile flickered. Her eyes darted, just for a second, toward the cluster of phones already raised around the room. Actually, I think I see someone I need to talk to. Sorry." She walked away before he could respond. He tried again. A woman in emerald silk. "No, thank you." A woman he'd met at a charity auction last spring. She simply shook her head and turned her back. A fourth woman saw him coming and physically ducked behind a passing server's tray of champagne glasses, holding her breath until he passed. Someone laughed. Then another. Soon it wasn't even subtle. Guests were openly filming, openly snickering, openly enjoying the spectacle of the billionaire's son standing in the middle of the dance floor with his hand extended toward nobody at all. Nathan kept his face still. He'd had 3 years of practice. Outside, in the small garden courtyard attached to the event hall, Sarah was finishing up the last arrangement. Fresh white roses for the head table. Something she'd insisted on personally delivering, even though it wasn't technically her job tonight. She peeled off her gloves and glanced through the tall windows into the ballroom. She saw a man standing completely alone on a dance floor full of people. She saw the laughter. She saw him smiling in that particular way people smile when they're trying very hard not to feel anything at all. She knew that smile. She'd worn it herself, more times than she could count. She picked up the last bundle of roses and walked toward the doors. A security guard stepped in front of her immediately. "Ma'am, this event is invitation only." "I know," Sarah said pleasantly. "I'm not staying. I just need to deliver these." She held up the roses as evidence. "I can't let you." "Relax," she said, stepping past him with the easy confidence of someone who had never once in her life waited for permission to be kind. "I'm only borrowing your billionaire for one song." The guard blinked. Then, against his better judgment, he laughed. Sarah walked into the ballroom in her work clothes, dirt still on her knees, roses in her arms, and crossed the entire dance floor while 400 wealthy guests stared at her like she'd grown a second head. She set the roses down on the nearest table. She looked at Nathan, and she smiled. "Would you mind dancing with someone who doesn't care what people think?" For a moment, Nathan just stared at her. Long enough that she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then something in his face cracked open. Not embarrassment this time, but surprise. And underneath the surprise, something close to relief. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "I'm the worst dancer in the entire country." Sarah grinned. "Perfect. I happen to be the worst gardener in Nigeria." He almost laughed despite himself. "Then why are you a gardener?" "Because Canada hasn't hired me as a comedian yet," she said, deadpan. A few guests nearby overheard and burst out laughing. Real laughter this time, not the cruel kind. Nathan felt something in his chest loosen for the first time all night. She held out her hand. The orchestra, sensing an opportunity, began to play again. The music began. The first 30 seconds were a disaster by any normal standard. Nathan stepped left when he should have stepped right. He nearly toppled into a server, But instead of stiffening, instead of apologizing, Sarah deliberately stepped the wrong way too, mirroring his mistakes instead of correcting them. When he nearly tripped, she nearly tripped beside him, laughing the entire time like it was the funniest thing she'd ever done. "Are you doing that on purpose?" Nathan whispered. "Doing what?" "Stepping on your own feet." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Sarah said, completely straight-faced, right before she stumbled directly into his shoulder and burst out laughing. By the second minute, the guests who'd been filming his humiliation were filming something else entirely. Two people laughing so hard they could barely stay upright, spinning clumsily across the floor like they'd choreographed the chaos on purpose. The crowd that had been smirking now watched in genuine delight. Someone started clapping along to the rhythm. Nathan King, the man who hadn't laughed at a gala in 3 years, was laughing so hard there were tears in his eyes. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the dance floor didn't feel like an execution. It felt like a room full of strangers watching him be, for once, completely and unapologetically human. If you're still smiling right now, comment "Kindness wins" below. Let's see who's still watching this unforgettable story. The song ended. The room applauded. Really applauded, not the polite golf clap kind. Nathan, breathless and grinning, turned to thank Sarah properly. But across the room, a different expression had settled onto Michael Reed's face. Not amusement, fury. He crossed the floor in long, sharp strides. "What exactly was that?" "That," Nathan said, still catching his breath, "was the first good time I've had at one of these things in 3 years. That," Michael snapped, "was an employee, a gardener, making a spectacle of this company in front of every investor in this city." He turned to Sarah, his voice dropping into something cold and final. "You're fired, effective immediately. Security will collect your badge." The room went quiet again, but differently this time. Uncomfortable, tense. "You can't fire her over a dance," Nathan said. "I can fire her for insubordination, for trespassing into a restricted event, and for embarrassing this company in front of half its board." Michael didn't even look at Nathan. "This isn't up for discussion." Nathan turned to his father, who'd been watching the whole exchange from near the head table. Marcus King's face was unreadable, his jaw tight. "Dad, the board has spoken," Marcus said quietly, and something in his voice suggested this was costing him more than he was letting on. "I'm sorry, Nathan." Sarah didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply nodded once, picked up her gloves from the table where she'd left them, and said, "Thank you for the dance." Then she walked out of the ballroom with her head high, leaving 400 wealthy guests in stunned silence behind her. Nathan stood frozen, watching the doors swing shut. He had never felt more ashamed of his own family's money in his entire life. The next morning, the garden beds outside King Global's headquarters sat untouched. Nobody noticed at first. By 10 o'clock, the receptionist hadn't smiled at a single visitor. By 11, 2 maintenance workers were standing near the elevators, arguing in low voices with their supervisor. By noon, half the ground floor staff had simply stopped working. "What is going on?" Michael demanded, storming through the lobby. "They heard you fired Sarah," the head of security told him flatly. "She's a gardener." "She's the reason this building doesn't feel like a morgue," the man said, not bothering to hide his disgust. "You don't understand what she did here. None of you upstairs ever did." It started coming out in pieces. Sarah had remembered every receptionist's birthday for 4 years running, leaving a single flower on their desk each time. She'd sat with a grieving security guard for 2 hours after his mother passed, saying nothing, just staying. She'd left cut flowers on the desk of an intern who'd been crying in the stairwell after a brutal performance review. No note, no explanation, just roses and a small drawing of a smiling sun. She remembered names, she remembered stories. She made a building full of exhausted, overlooked employees feel, for a few minutes each day, like somebody actually saw them. By 2 o'clock, an open letter began circulating internally, signed by over 100 staff members, demanding Sarah's reinstatement. Marcus King read it twice in his office, then called an emergency board meeting. "She's a gardener," Michael said again, exasperated when the meeting convened. "I don't understand why this is a crisis." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, standing slowly. "You don't understand. None of us did." He set the letter down on the table. "A company isn't built by skyscrapers, Michael. It's built by people. And apparently the most valuable person in this entire building has been working in our flower beds for 4 years while the people in this room never once learned her name." The vote came swiftly after that. Michael Reed was removed from his position as chairman that same afternoon, his cruelty laid bare in front of the very board he'd spent years cultivating loyalty within. Nathan didn't wait for the vote to finish before he left the building. He drove himself, no driver, no assistant, to the small apartment complex on the edge of the city, the kind of building with peeling paint and a community garden squeezed into the courtyard between cracked concrete. He found Sarah there, kneeling in the dirt among a row of tomato plants, her gloves back on, humming quietly to herself like nothing in the world had happened. She looked up and saw him standing awkwardly at the edge of the garden, holding a single red rose and a small portable speaker. "I still owe you a proper dance," he said. Sarah raised an eyebrow, looking pointedly at his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the soft garden soil. "In those? This should be interesting." He set the speaker down and pressed play. The music was soft, imperfect, nothing like the orchestra from the night before. He held out his hand the way he had in the ballroom, except this time there was no audience, no chandeliers, no pressure. Just the open sky and a garden full of vegetables that didn't care how badly he danced. Sarah took his hand. They were still terrible at it. He still stepped on her feet. She still laughed so hard she nearly fell into the tomato steaks. But neither of them cared, not even a little, and that was the entire point. "I heard what happened at the company," Sarah said quietly, swaying slightly off rhythm. "Michael's gone." "He should have been gone a long time ago," Nathan said. "I should have noticed you a long time ago, too. I walked past that garden almost every day for 4 years, and I never once asked your name." "Most people don't," Sarah said, without bitterness. "It's all right. I wasn't dancing for attention." "Then why did you do it? Why risk getting fired for a complete stranger?" Sarah considered the question seriously, the laughter fading from her face for just a moment. "Because I know what it feels like to stand in a room and have everyone decide you don't matter before they even know your name. I figured somebody should remind you that you do." Nathan stopped dancing entirely, just looking at her. "Nobody's ever said anything like that to me before, and I've had people say a lot of things to me, most of them because of my father's money." "That's the problem with money," Sarah said gently. "It's very loud. It drowns out the only things actually worth hearing. If you're still watching up to now, type 'I'm still here' in the comments. I want to know who's made it this far with us." Months passed. Sarah didn't disappear back into the flower beds, and she didn't vanish into a fairy tale either. She negotiated. When the board, humbled and eager to make amends, offered her an executive position overseeing employee wellness and community initiatives, she accepted on one condition. "I keep the gardens," she told them flatly, arms crossed, standing in a boardroom for the first time in her life and looking entirely unbothered by it. 2 days a week, minimum. I'm not trading dirt under my fingernails for a corner office. Flowers and people both need daily care, and I intend to keep giving it to both." They agreed, mostly because nobody in that room had the nerve to argue with her anymore. She and Nathan spent the following year building something neither of them had planned for, a foundation funded quietly by the King family that created community gardens and green spaces in underserved neighborhoods across the city. Sarah designed every layout herself. Nathan, despite knowing nothing about horticulture, learned to dig holes in straight lines and stopped pretending he minded getting his hands dirty. Marcus King attended the opening of the third garden personally, watching his son kneel in the soil beside a woman who had once been invisible to his entire company, and said quietly to no one in particular, "I built an empire and somehow missed the only thing that actually mattered." At the following year's charity gala, the ballroom filled again with the same wealthy faces, the same chandeliers, the same orchestra tuning in the corner. Olivia Bennet was there, watching from across the room with an expression that suggested she very much regretted her decision the year before. Whispers had already started the moment Nathan walked in. Would the king of two left feet humiliate himself again? But this time, before the orchestra even finished tuning, before a single other woman could approach him, Nathan crossed the ballroom directly to the woman standing near the doors in a simple green dress, dirt-free for once, smiling the same smile she always wore. "Have you improved?" Sarah asked. "Not even slightly," Nathan said. "Still the worst dancer in the country." "Then why look so confident?" "Because," he said, holding out his hand the way he had the very first time, "I've gotten much better at choosing the right partner." The room held its breath for 1 second, then erupted into applause, rising into a full standing ovation as the two of them moved onto the dance floor, still clumsy, still laughing, still completely unbothered by who was watching. People in that room would forget, eventually, who owned the company, who chaired the board, whose name was on the building. But none of them would ever forget the night a gardener walked into a ballroom full of the wealthiest people in the country and reminded every single one of them what actually mattered. So here's what this story really leaves us with. Kindness doesn't ask for an invitation, and it doesn't check anyone's bank balance before it decides someone is worth showing up for. Sarah never had money, never had status, never had a single advantage in that ballroom except the courage to walk toward someone everyone else had already written off. And it changed everything. Not just for Nathan, but for an entire company that had forgotten the people holding it together were the ones nobody bothered to thank. Michael Reed lost his position because he mistook cruelty for authority. Marcus King learned, late but in time, that an empire built on glass towers means nothing without the people who actually show up for each other inside them. And Nathan, the man with everything, finally understood that the thing he'd been missing all along wasn't a better dance partner. It was someone willing to stand beside him, mistakes and all, without flinching. Thank you so much for staying with us through this story. We poured our hearts into bringing Sarah and Nathan's journey to life, and if it made you smile, made you believe in kindness a little more, or reminded you of someone in your own life who deserves to be noticed, let us know in the comments what you enjoyed most about this story. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because we've got many more unforgettable stories like this one on the way, filled with heart, hope, and the kind of lessons that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.